this is going to be too close for me.
Okay.
It does, so I can,
Wherever you want.
I can push it a little bit.
Yeah. Well, hello everyone, and a warm welcome to you all, especially for those who have travelled near and far to be with us in this room today. It's much appreciated. And also everybody joining us online around the world. So every year we're fortunate to start the conference season in New York with the enlightening energies of Wesak and the Taurus full moon. As we know, Alice Bailey set up the Arcane School in New York 100 years ago, and this anniversary gives us the opportunity to reflect on the huge numbers of students who have passed through its portal during that time, to form part of its group aura, enriching it as well as being enriched by it. One striking change over the years is seeing how the student group has become so culturally diverse, so further enriching the group pool of thought. The school's spiritual quest to shift consciousness from self-centered individualism to group consciousness continues today with even more power and resolve. Its spiritual quest this work continues to be essential because only through an expanded sense of identity with the soul and with all souls can the fiery will to good of divine will be safely received and anchored on earth. So despite all the mistakes and the pain experienced along the way, as soon as this inner connectedness is realized, and the spiritual will awakened, sacrifice is a healing process as we work with the living transformative forces of the planet with joyful livingness. So this joyful livingness is reflected in our keynote. Let the group affirm the will as an expression of the law of sacrifice. And the need for this quality is apparent in view of the huge challenges which confront us. 100 years on, it seems that the role of discipleship groups and the New Group of World Servers is ever more crucial. And a recent school letter contained a simple quote in connection with this. The law of sacrifice governs those states of being which grow out of the establishment of right human relations. So this law then takes us to new states of identification with the planetary life. And this is the goal ahead. And despite this turmoil and suffering, sacrifice brings us to a change of direction. And this direction is emerging from the New Group of World Servers, thinkers, and academics around the world, and often with much synchronicity of thought. Academics are writing books about this great reset and reaching out to the public with their findings. So in every field of human living, they are observing the need to establish the power of we and the creative potential which will be released by the shift in thinking, the recognition that the old order must change. So this creative potential cannot be realized without igniting the sacrificial fire in our hearts and a subsequent transformation of consciousness. And while we see constructive progress, there is still much destructive selfishness and resistance to new ideas and energies that must be offset. So discipleship groups within the New Group of World Servers have a very special remit on the evolutionary path of return to evoke the spiritual will. The nature of divine will is hard to grasp, but we know that this divine activity demonstrates the true spirit of that misunderstood word, sacrifice. And the hierarchical chain runs like a chain of sacrifice throughout our planetary life. Each kingdom giving over its life to the next higher, fulfilling the purpose of the Logos. So in the human kingdom, the will becomes very active, and once the selfish will is overcome, it transforms into an ever-evolving realization of wholeness, being part of something greater with more meaning, which evokes a spirit of giving for others on many levels. So what began with our Logos, the great sacrifice, who undertook to save all lives on this planet until the last weary pilgrim finds his way home, leads eventually to a conscious recognition that we are cells of light within his body, and therefore part of his great purpose. And this longer-term goal illustrates the triumph of the evolutionary process, with the loving will replacing selfishness until the heaviness of perceived sacrifice disappears in the presence of self-forgetfulness. So this weekend, we'll have many different perspectives on this keynote. There's talks and discussions, visualizations and meditations, and they're all geared towards a greater understanding of the nature of will in relation to sacrifice. We also have panel discussions after each session, and there will be a chance for discussion both in the room and sharing comments online. But for now, let's just take a moment and then say together the affirmation of the disciple. I am a point of light within a greater light. I am a strand of loving energy within the stream of love divine. I am a point of sacrificial fire focused within the fiery will of God, and thus I stand. I am a way by which men may achieve. I am a source of strength, enabling them to stand. I am a beam of light, shining upon their way, and thus I stand. And standing thus revolve, and tread this way, the ways of men, and know the ways of God, and thus I stand. So we welcome our panelists now. Don't know if they're up on the Zoom screen yet. On Zoom we have Lawrence Newey, who is a trustee, and he's based in the London headquarters. He's probably at home in his garden, actually, but
That's right, this is my doppelganger.
Have you, is he there? No? Okay.
I didn't want to talk over the top of you because I thought you were going on to introducing the other people.
I am. I was expecting to see you on the screen. Anyway, hello.
I think you've seen enough of me.
No comment, thanks. And also, Wayne Sturber is online as well, I believe. Hello, Wayne.
Hello, everyone.
And with me here, the two of us carrying the brunt of the work here, Joseph Mayello. Joseph. And Kathy Newburn's going to be coming up and taking us through a visualization as well. So that would be good. So we'll ask Lawrence to start with his thoughts on the divine electric will.
Okay, thanks, Chris. And first of all, I'm very sorry that I'm not able to be present physically due to an elderly mother that I have to keep an eye on. Privilege in itself, but nevertheless, it would have been nice to actually be there because working with the actual fires on the physical plane in a group meeting, there's nothing like that. So this is a secondary experience, but it's nevertheless the next best thing. So those of you who received our 3 Spiritual Festivals booklet, well, you may recall that its theme was focusing the divine electric will. As the Arcane School Conference Keynote emerged out of this theme and is also concerned with the energy of the will, I thought it might be interesting to briefly speculate on how the will is focused and transmitted by the initiate consciousness in service of the plan. There was a striking image of an eye on the cover of the booklet, the mailing that we sent out, and if we take a closer look at its structure, we'll note that the surface of the coloured part of the eye, the iris, is formed of long radial fibres called the iris stroma. Now, the stroma connects to a circular muscle which contracts the pupil and a set of dilator muscles which pull the iris radially to enlarge the pupil. By controlling the diameter of the pupil, the iris controls the amount of light that reaches the back of the eye at the retina. Of course, this all happens automatically in response to how much light there is in the environment. But it is through a related process of electrical contraction and expansion that the inner eye of the soul, the eye of Shiva, is utilized. Vision is the key factor in cooperating with the divine will. And this is indicated in the idea of focus, in the affirmation of the disciple. I am a point of sacrificial fire, focused within the fiery will of God. Focus concerns inner vision and outer transmission through the all-seeing eye of Shiva. And it's through the awakening of this eye of the soul that true inner vision becomes possible. Through this eye, the initiate looks within to behold the divine plan. And then, looking outwardly, the energy of will is directed to guide the activities of the Deva lives, who are the building agents on the planet. Through this eye, thought structures are directed upon their intended path of service. Now, the eye of Shiva works primarily through one of the energy centers in the etheric body, the Ajna center. And the Ajna center is sometimes referred to as the lower correspondence of this eye. And we can see from this next diagram in the book Esoteric Healing that the Ajna center, which is situated just in front and in between the two physical eyes, is a different shape to all the others. And we read that this center, having only 2 real petals, is not a true lotus in the same sense as the other centers. Its petals are composed of 96 lesser petals or units of force, 48 in each petal, making 96. But these do not assume the flower shape of the other lotuses. They spread out like the wings of an airplane to the right and left of the head. And they're symbolic of the right-hand path and the left-hand path, of the way of matter and the way of spirit. And it's through this center that the energy of spirit and matter can be brought together to create forms of various types and qualities as a contribution to the great process of redeeming planetary substance and evolving the planetary light body. Now, the energy of the centers below the Ajna center are eventually transferred into their higher corresponding centers in the head. And so we can imagine taking these centers out of the diagram so that we're just left with the head center, the Ajna center, and the line of force descending right down into the depths of life in the lower worlds. When we do visualize this, we're left with an interesting cross. At the top of the vertical stream of force, we have the head center, representing the divine will. And crossing this stream of force, we have the Ajna center, where the energy of the divine will and the energy of matter are fused and blended. Now, this cross has similarities to the one portrayed in Discipleship in the New Age, the cross as the expression of the vertical and the horizontal life. The cross represents the initiate working as a point of sacrificial fire, focused within the fiery will of God, a state of consciousness wherein freedom has been attained through identification with the root of one's being, which is pure will. And paradoxically, it's discovered that once the spiritual will is active in this manner, under the law of sacrifice, there is no such thing as sacrifice. The initiate consciousness suffers no sense of imposed constraint, but becomes fully engrossed in applying the energy of the will in creative service to the whole. The Ajna center plays a central role in this process because the Ajna center registers or focuses the intention to create. The Ajna center expresses imagination and desire in their two highest forms, and these are the dynamic factors lying behind all creation. Now, bearing all this in mind, if the ancient truism, as above, so below, is true, we should be able to find a correspondence to this creative process at work in the cosmos. This brings us on to image 4. Here's an image of the Twin Jet Nebula, and that's an outstanding example of the general structure that characterized bipolar nebula, although the processes that are occurring are taking place in other types of nebula too. I say bipolar nebula make up 10 to 20%, but I think if you saw nebulas from other angles, that it would show that they all have this sort of similarity when looked upon from a particular vantage point. But anyway, a nebula is a luminescent part of the interstellar medium, and it consists of ionized neutral or molecular hydrogen in cosmic dust. It's the building material out of which stars and planets are formed. Electric universe theory describes a creative process taking place in these nebula that share many features of the creative process that takes place through the Ajna center. You can see how the central point of tension there is where the zone of creation brings the matter in from right and left. And it's there that spheroids are squeezed together, if you like, through a process called Markland convection that results in planetoids and suns, stars. But this next image shows another interesting perspective. This is the Cat's Eye Nebula. And this gives us another perspective on the structure of nebula, particularly the similarity between the cells of electrical force you can see either side of the star in the middle, and the cells or vortices of electrical force that we call petals in the Ajna center. They both share this electrical confinement that's taking place within electrical ring pass knots. It is an integrating force of electricity that produces this in plasma. In fact, the rings that we can see there are known as plasma sheaths or double layers. They have various names, other names too, Langmuir sheaths, Debye sheaths, but we can't go into the subtle differences between those at the moment, but you get the general idea. It's within these spheres of different electrical potential that matter is confined and then subjected to a contraction process through which stellar bodies are formed. And this has striking similarities with the way in which the Ajna center can be utilized through a process of electromagnetic contraction and manipulation. Each cell or petal of energy in the Ajna center has a different force composition and therefore a different quality and facility. And through a combination of these, the creation and projection of thought forms takes place. Finally, we can see in this image of the glowing eye nebula, the lines of twisting electrified plasma that are analogous to the iris stroma we looked at the first image of the eye. Well, these plasma filaments are common to all nebula, and as with the eye and the Ajna center, they work through a process of electromagnetic contraction. In this cosmic process, we have the pinching down and shaping of matter into a spherical form at the center of the filament, and the creation of a stellar body. And of course, these creative processes and capacities in the cosmos and in man are not identical, but they do work on the same principle. The integrating aspect of electricity through which all forms are built and which the Tibetan predicted would soon be discovered. In fact, electrically minded astrophysicists already know of this. And for those interested in esoteric science, it's confirmation of the ancient truism, as above, so below.
Thank you very much, Lawrence. It's fascinating, as usual. If I think we'll go through all the presentations and then so that we have time for our discussion at the end. And, if anyone wants to ask anything at that point, that's fine. Okay. So we'll next hear from Joseph Maero. Thank you. On the science of approach.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm going to try to move this back without breaking it. Okay. As we come together to celebrate the second of the three major festivals of the year, we have the benefit of hearing from several different students on a number of subjects. As speakers, one of the opportunities presented to us is being able to introduce new ideas or ways of looking at things derived from our own study and meditation. Gatherings such as this are about the open and free exchange of information and the sharing of the results of our own experimentation. This we do with the hopes that others may take what we contribute and expand upon it in their own work. It is important to remember that no teaching we encounter should ever remain static, and everything can be built upon. That being said, as we focus our talks this weekend on the nature of the will, I would like to start things off by discussing the science of approach. I will be dividing this talk into three sections: the three laws of approach, how meditation is used in connection with them, and why all of this matters. What then do we mean when we use the word approach in an esoteric context, and how does this relate to the will aspect of divinity? To begin with, we must recognize the usefulness of possessing a more technical understanding of the planes of our system. To start, each of the 7 planes of our system has 7 subplanes, and each of these subplanes is an aspect of matter with its own density, color, vibrancy, and methods of recognition or approach. Approach, in this context, can be defined as the result of the application of mental sensitivity to that next subplane which lies just beyond reach. As most of us recognize, the lower the subplane, the denser the matter, and the more diverse the qualities which compose it. This process of approach, or of shedding diversity in consciousness as one progresses towards a consciousness defined by synthesis or unity, is the hallmark of the destructive power of the first ray, which champions the will aspect of divinity. There are 3 primary laws of approach which affect human evolution. These 3 main approaches are called the law of right human relations, the law of group endeavor, and the law of spiritual approach. Each of these 3 approaches takes place primarily within the consciousness of the individual or group as they develop sensitivity to the 3rd subplane from the 4th subplanes of either the mental plane, the Buddhic plane, or the Atmic plane. One of the greatest tools we have at our disposal as we struggle to make sense of all this is our application of the law of correspondences. This law can be summed up in that old saying, as above, so below, as we just heard. In practice, this means that through an understanding of one of these laws of approach, valuable information regarding the other 2 can be worked out. Keeping this in mind will help shed light on these 3 laws of approach which we will now discuss. The first law of approach is called the law of right human relations and deals with the spiritual evolution of the individual within the 3 worlds or planes of human experience. It is the law which leads one to an understanding of the need for unity and plants the seeds of group work, which at this point in the evolutionary process takes place mainly in the outer world of daily activity. The principle, which is this law's method of execution, is called the principle of goodwill. This principle of goodwill is seen mainly working out through the 6th or astral plane, as that is where the consciousness of the majority of humanity is polarized. This feeling of goodwill, being the manifestation of the divine will to good on the 6th plane, is largely responsible for the stimulation of the matter of the 4th subplane of the mental vehicles of mankind, and for the sensitivity which is developed within it to the 3rd mental subplane, the subplane of the abstract mind, and the lowest of the 3 tiers of the soul. Its culmination is achieved at the initiation of the transfiguration, which completely unites the purified personality with the soul. Up until this initiation, the path is traveled as an individual, working towards group goals. The second law of approach is called the law of group endeavor, and its method of achievement is the principle of unanimity. This law, as with each of these laws, can be seen to mirror the ones above and below them. As the law of right human relations sought to develop right group responsibility as an individual, this law seeks to achieve the same thing on a higher turn of the spiral. As the consciousness of the completely integrated, soul-infused personality mentally strives up into the highest 3 subplanes of the 4th, or Buddhic plane, it fully recognizes its place within its own group, or ashram. That recognition of placement within the individual's group, that sense of unanimity, is the key to the method of approach called group endeavor. At this point, the path is traveled as a member of a group, working towards group goals. The third law of approach is called the law of spiritual approach, with its method of achievement being the principle of essential divinity. At this stage, the mental process as we know it has been left behind, and the essence of life, rather than consciousness, is the identifying quality of the group's awareness. The working out of the law of spiritual approach takes place within the matter of the third or Atmic plane. As the type of approach experienced gets closer to the unifying source of all life, the truths veiled by their names and the names of their principles becomes more abstract and difficult to penetrate. At this lofty and mysterious stage, it is said that individual identity exists, yet doesn't exist. The essence of the monad, that singular yet strangely universal highest aspect of the self, expressing itself on the Atmic plane, reaches up in one final act of self-identification. Throughout this final stage, the path is traveled as a world group working towards world goals. In its entirety, this process of approach is about the ever-narrowing journey from personality awareness to monadic awareness through the use of the first-rate technique of sacrifice or destruction as a means of synthesis. Now let us move on to the use of esoteric meditation within this process and how its proper use provides the conditions needed for this inward and upward movement. Let us first ask ourselves what esoteric meditation is. Esoteric meditation is, at its core, the application of mental sensitivity to that new state of awareness which is just beyond reach. The development of mental sensitivity cannot be stressed enough, and it is the key to success with regards to becoming consciously aware of more refined states of matter, or subplanes. The development of mental sensitivity provides the meditator, over time, with the opportunity to experience points of tension. This concept of tension is not so much a physical plane happening as it is a heightened mental state that one learns to consciously reach and then hold. Through practice and observation, the experience of these high points of mental tension are discovered to be intimately connected with the cycles of the breath. These high points will happen many times during any meditation because they are a result of the higher interlude of the breathing cycle. Once the connection between these high points of mental tension and the higher interlude of the breath are consciously recognized, a new opportunity is presented. As the meditator breathes in, they slowly and unconsciously align their three personality vehicles until the higher interlude is reached. At this point, the meditator, with practice, learns that they can enter a state of focus that allows them access to those higher energies which, once mental sensitivity is properly developed, eventually become their new center of polarization. It is during this higher interlude that the mental body and, during the first approach, the soul, are consciously brought together. As the breath is released, we have the alignment of the soul, mind, and physical brain, at which time all those gained intuitions are brought down into waking consciousness. As one becomes more familiar with this cycle, all thoughts of the breath are eventually left behind, and the process proceeds naturally, no matter what the objective of the particular meditation being used. This process of reaching these high points of mental tension through the application of a mental sensitivity during the higher interlude of the breath is the key to the practical side of the science of approach. Each of these three main approaches discussed above are a result of this rhythmic process, each in their own way, and it is through sensing new points of tension, learning to hold those points of tension, and then using them as stepping stones towards sensing new ones that eventually brings about success in all three stages of approach. Now we come to the final section. Why does an understanding of these laws of approach matter? I would venture to say that everyone in this room is here because of a desire to learn, and in learning to serve. We do not meditate for our own benefit, nor do we strive for greater understanding in order to advance ourselves. All that we do in the name of service to others. As we progress on the path, the process of approach gradually leads one from a state of separation to that of the group. And as we learn to utilize meditation, we develop the necessary sensitivity to guide us into ever-expanding states of inclusiveness. These three methods of approach and the three centers in our planetary logos, humanity, hierarchy, and Shambhala, are intimately connected, and it is through the interaction of these three centers that the possibility of approach exists. Why then is the science of approach important? Because it is the very essence of group cohesion at every level, and inevitably leads to the awakening of the planetary logos and all life within it. In conclusion, I would like to ask that as we go forth into the world, each playing our own role in the cosmic plan, we keep in mind this science of approach, not only to make it a larger part in our lives, but in doing so, to make it a part of every life we encounter. Thank you.
Thank you, Joe. It's so good that you brought up the laws and the principles, and I think really we should do that more in the school. I think it does come in at some stage, but
It helps
it's,
guide,
yes, it's
form a
most
channel.
important. Thank you. I'd ask Kathy now to come up and to take us through the visualization.
Yeah.
Thanks, Kathy.
So this brief visualization begins with a passage from one of the ancient texts, and the Tibetan says that it's particularly related to this time in planetary history and to the interrelationship, the growing interrelationship between the three planetary centers, which Joseph just mentioned, Shambhala, hierarchy, and humanity. So if we keep that intention in mind, mostly focusing within the second center, hierarchy, I think that's the underlying intention behind this passage and this visualization. So let's visualize the triad of the three planetary centers. The apex of this triangle is based in the courts of Shambhala. And from that point, see two streams of power pour forth. One into the heart of love, the hierarchy. And the other into the heart of humanity. Thus do the energies circulate. The great Lord's head, heart, and throat begin to beat in rhythmic unison. Now visualize the energies being related unto the world of men. Thus can the will of God appear within our world. Thus can the great Lord who guards the council chamber of this sphere of solar life carry his purpose to the holy ashramic groups. And from thence into the minds of men. And this because their hearts are safeguarded by the fire of love. Standing now as a group within the heart center of the new group of world servers, hold the group mind open and receptive to the extraplanetary forces of enlightenment pouring in from Taurus at this time. Realize the inpouring fire of love, burning and destroying all barriers in human nature, all separating walls between individuals, groups, and nations. Realize the one life, circulating and relating all centers and planes of consciousness. And now, in unison with the great life and lives, visualize the group standing within the center of the Om, hearing its sound reverberating throughout the worlds. And we close by sounding the Gayatri. O thou who givest sustenance to the universe, from whom all things proceed, to whom all things return, unveil to us the face of the true spiritual sun, hidden by a disk of golden light, that we may know the truth and do our whole duty as we journey to thy sacred feet.
Thank you, Kathy. Right, Wayne Sturber. Wayne, are you there?
I think I am. You
Yeah,
tell me.
good. You're going to be talking to us about approaching sacrifice through intelligent love.
Yes, ma'am. Was that a directive or? Thank you. Welcome, everyone. Hello, everyone. It's lovely to be here. I have a question. Is there a formula of approach to the love that Christ embodied so that we could understand? Would such a formula of approach give us a clearer insight into the mind of Christ? Would it provide a substantial key to his mind and thus bring us a little closer to understanding Christ's initial contact with the Shambhala force, by means of which, and on behalf of humanity, he established a relationship which, even after 2,000 years, is but a thin, frail line of connecting energy. The Master DK gives us two brief summations about the second point of revelation, from which our keynote is taken. It involves the astral plane, and it relates to the second initiation. In a seeming expansion of these 2 points, he says, the Christ embodies within himself the great point of revelation, which has been expressed by me in the words, the will is an expression of the law of sacrifice. The invocation now mounting from humanity is at this time focused in or originates upon the plane of emotions. The plans for his coming are being laid in the higher correspondence of that plane, the Buddhic plane, or the plane of pure reason. Let's explore where we may find a formula of approach to the love that Christ embodied so that we can understand. To do this, we will dip briefly into some esoteric teaching. In a treatise on cosmic fire, the Tibetan gives charts on the constitution of man. My focus today is the egoic lotus, the body of causes, and the expression of the soul upon the mental plane. For those unfamiliar with the charts, imagine a 12-petaled lotus with 3 concentric circles of petals unfolding from the outer through to the folded innermost 3 petals. The 9 petals impress spiritual energies in evolutionary progression to revelation of the jewel hidden by the innermost petals. These love petals energies are petal 1, higher knowledge applied through love on the physical and astral plane. Petal 2, the higher intelligent love on physical and astral planes. Petal 3, loving intelligent sacrifice on the physical and astral planes. These petals are under impression from the plane of Buddhi, which is the unifying principle of groups. In these simple definitions, we have an introduction to the astral plane. However, there are 2 additional love petals, the knowledge petal of love on the physical plane and the sacrifice petal of love, the will to sacrifice through love on the mental plane and thus to serve. These 2 additional love petals ground that love within the physical plane while reaching out through the will through the mind. The sacrificial petal of love introduces us to mental sacrifice, cerebral sacrifice, as DK puts it, under the influence of Pluto, just as the love petal of sacrifice introduces us to astral or emotional sacrifice. Sacrifice and will are intimately related, but so are love and sacrifice, as just indicated. Loving intelligent sacrifice on the physical and astral plane, and the will to sacrifice through love on the mental plane demonstrate this relationship, especially the latter. These love qualities are certainly the minimum that Christ embodied so that we could understand, even if for us the sacrifice petal of love, is a stretch goal. But is there more? What if a group, through fixed determination, seeks to consciously embody these qualities? Would it become a group agent for the fecundation of humanity with love? These qualities are already here and were also present at the time of Christ's last appearance. What's the difference? Is there opportunity? Is there responsibility? Next slide. Thank you. About love, DK counsels. Love is a hard thing to cultivate. Such is the inherent selfishness of human nature. It is a difficult thing to apply to all conditions of life, and its expression will demand of you the utmost you have to give and the stamping out of your selfish personal activities. There is a hint of sacrifice in these words. Would you agree? Let's take a closer look at the development of these 5 petals and maybe see why the hint is there. Love petal 1 unfoldment is brought about by the conscious balancing of the pairs of opposites and the gradual utilization of the law of sacrifice of attachment and repulsion. The man passes out of the hall of ignorance, where, from the egoic point of view, he works blindly and begins to appreciate the effects of his physical plane life. By a realization of his essential duality, he begins to comprehend the causes. Love petal 2. Unfoldment is brought about through the process of gradually transmuting the love of the subjective nature or of the self within. This has a dual effect and works through onto the physical plane in many lives of turmoil, of endeavor, and of failure as a man strives to turn his attention to the love of the real. Love petal 3 unfoldment is brought about by the attitude of man as he consciously endeavors to give up his own desires for the sake of his group. His motive is still somewhat a blind one and still colored by the desire for a return of that which he gives and for love from those he seeks to serve, but it is of a much higher order than the blind sacrifice to which a man is driven by circumstances, as is the case in the earlier unfoldment. The petal of love for the physical plane unfolds through physical relationships and the gradual growth of love from love of self to love of others. And the love petal, or the petal of love on the mental plane, unfolds through the conscious, steady application of all the powers of the soul to the service of humanity, with no thought of return nor any desire for reward for the immense sacrifice involved. The love petals suggest a natural, automatic, and even passive, one might say unconscious evolution of humanity. It's as though it is something that happens to us. Because this is an astral Buddhic solar system, it's just a matter of time, so to speak, before these qualities become so ingrained in humanity that the astral plane will perfectly reflect the Buddhic plane. But Christ's mission is something more. Not waiting, he initiated embodiment of love so that we could understand. Can we discern, even if only a little, what that required at a level we can understand? Let's look at the love petals under the influence of the rulers of Pisces, the planetary energies the Christ would have been dealing with according to their general qualities, and though receding, will still be powerfully impressing humanity for a while. We see here under the constellation of Pisces, the rulers are Ray 2, love, wisdom, and on the higher levels, Ray 1, will and power for the esoteric discipleship, and will or power for the hierarchical. These ray qualities might be called the ABCs of those ray energies. But what if we apply interpretation of the 7 rays in terms of will and not of love or consciousness? What do we have? Here we see under Pisces, now ray 2 is the will to unification, and ray 1 is the will which initiates. Now, applying these will aspects of rays 1 and 2 to the 5 love petals of the egoic lotus, we have what I call a cross of loving sacrifice. We have Buddhi under the unifying principle of groups, the wisdom aspect, the Christ force, the intuition, impressing via the love petals of the egoic lotus, love petal of knowledge, the will to initiate conscious balancing of the pairs of opposites and utilization of the law of attraction and repulsion. The love petal of love, the will to initiate transmuting the love of the subjective nature or of the self within. The love petal of sacrifice, the will to initiate consciously giving up one's own desires for the sake of one's group. The knowledge petal of love, the will to unify physical relationships and grow from love of self to love of others. Finally, the sacrifice petal of love, the will to initiate conscious application of all powers of the soul to the service of humanity, with no thought of return, nor any desire for reward for the immense sacrifice involved. With the application of the will aspects of rays 1 and 2 to the astral plane via these love petals, become Aquarian group service to make it holy, to render whole that which provides the most disturbing element in the existence of mankind. Can we agree that element is the astral plane, the emotional life of humanity? For me, all these thoughts beckoned a call to action. But what action? Where to act? How to act? As I asked this question of myself, the triangles project popped into my mind. Briefly, in triangles, 3 co-workers agree to a short daily meditation. As a small spiritual group with a fixed determination, using the creative imagination, the 3 group members visualize their triangle, then link it with the triangle's global network of light and love. Triangle's co-workers are free to exercise their creativity in this service. Nevertheless, newly active triangle co-workers learn the soul or Christ principle can be found as a central point within each triangle. And many people visualize this central point as a source of light and love used in this group work. The short service concludes with a great invocation. About the great invocation, the Tibetan tells us, not a day goes by that the Christ himself does not sound it forth. Finally, consider this. We're told that the Triangles Project is so close to the heart of the hierarchy at this time. But isn't Christ the heart of the hierarchy? Which hierarchy is on the Buddhic plane? Which is the unifying principle of groups, large or tiny? Making an adaptive analogy of the transitive property, if A equals B and B equals C, then A equals C. Must not triangles be close to the heart of the Christ? Next slide, please. Would visualizing this cross of love and sacrifice within each triangle as the central point on its tiny scale is expressing the law of sacrifice through the medium of the developed, pure reasoning will, and not simply from that of impulsive love and its activity, thus assists the Christ in the fecundation of humanity with love. With such a fixed determination, achieve a paralleling expression of the law of sacrifices, affirming the will as an expression of the law of sacrifice. Thank you.
Thank you, Wayne. It's certainly given us a lot to think about. Yeah, we can't just run something off, I don't think. It's just very thoughtful. Thank you. Right, now, I think we should go into discussion now. I think I mentioned earlier that in each session of the conference, there are going to be some discussion points, and the panel will just discuss them. In this case, it'll be Joseph and Wayne and Lawrence. And so I think we will do this first so that we cover them. And then if we want to come back to any of the presentations and share some thoughts, we can do that. So Michael, will you pick them up? Thank you. I'll read it out anyway. We're going to be discussing what is the will, what is it not. It's said that the mode par excellence by which the will can be developed is the cultivation of the recognition of the divine plan down the ages. Is humanity demonstrating this growing recognition of the plan and a consequent development of the will? So perhaps we should start off with what is the will and what is it not?
Well, I think personally, one of the most abstract definitions of the will is, and I've written it down in my own words, the will is the manifestation of divine purpose. This manifestation takes the form of the matter of the third or atmic plane of our system. We all know what that means in words, but understanding it is, obviously above all of us. Personally, I think that we see the will in everyday life through the law of right human relations. That, to me, is the most concrete way to recognize it. And everybody in this room does something different, profession-wise, and we're all manifesting that in our own way, to the best of our ability. And then the law of goodwill, the principle of goodwill, as I mentioned in my talk, is the way that manifests, through us. So.
Any thoughts from the online sector?
Well, we're told, and I think somebody brought it up yesterday, one of the comments, that desire is the lowest aspect of will. And I think, and one of my favorite, gosh, it's hard to pick one, but one of my favorite quotations of the Tibetan is sentinel desire. And one day I looked that up. Of course, I know you think you know what desire is, but I said, what exactly does sentinel mean? And it's the guard, and it's like whenever we experience some type of desire, whether it's low desire, which probably you wouldn't realize this at the time, but when we have transmuted desire into at least aspiration on some levels, and particularly some type of spiritual aspiration, then we're getting a touch, if you will, of the will, of the higher will. When we have this sense of a desire to do something, we can how can I say, we can I will say rest assured, that's a terrible phrase, but we can at least surmise that we're experiencing some touch of the will, and it's just a matter of evolving toward that will to understand it and appreciate it and recognize it until we are actually way past all of us at one with that will. Does that make sense?
Thank you. I thought my favorite one was the German philosopher Schopenhauer. I think we mentioned it in a school letter. He was somebody who studied both Eastern and Western philosophy. So it's quite unusual that it's usually mainly Western philosophy that's studied. But he made a wonderful comment that, quote, if one looks deeply enough into oneself, one will discover not only one's own essence, but also the essence of the universe. And in a sense, that essence to me, the will is life, really. But they become so abstract, these words, that they kind of get lost. But I thought that was rather lovely.
Well, Schopenhauer was one of the what's known as the pessimistic philosophers, and nevertheless, Blavatsky drew upon his idea of doing away with the idea of splitting up spirit and matter, and instead just having two things, the will and representation. And that's a very interesting way of looking at things, because, of course, it depends what perspective you take as to what the will actually is. We can think in terms of the planes for sure and get technical that way, but ultimately the will is, as you said, the life principle. It's motion, eternal motion, and Blavatsky describes it as such. We put it in our 3SF booklet. She described the will as the one and sole principle of abstract eternal motion, or its ensouling essence. The will creates, for the will in motion is force, and force produces matter. So will really is the drive through space, the divine circulatory flow. And at the other end of the scale, she also said, I will, and my limbs move. Ultimately, everything comes down to the will. But Western philosophers have spent centuries trying to work out what the will is, and driven themselves mad in the process. So it does depend very much on the context in which we're examining it. But I think to put it as part of the life principle is a very good way of doing it. And what I particularly like the Tibetan does in psychology, he reduces everything ultimately just to three things, whereas Schopenhauer goes for the will and representation, or the motion of the divine force and the symbol. He goes for three things: life, quality, appearance. So you've got life and you've got the appearance, and when you bring these two together, quality is generated. So whenever things get a little bit tough going in terms of esoteric philosophy, if you always think in terms of life, quality, appearance, I find that that's quite a clarifying thing to have up your sleeve.
So, have we finished with the will? Any more thoughts?
Yeah, I would like to add something,
Yeah.
if I may. In keeping with the theme of approach, does my hand go down yet? In keeping with the theme of approach, as I ponder the themes of approach, as I saw in Joe's, the title to Joe's talk and mine as well, I got to thinking about people who in our, everybody here is on some approach to the soul, at the very least, okay, with various levels. And as I thought about the approaching of the will, or understanding the will, I thought about our approaches to the soul, and it's a step-by-step process. I mean, this is this is the mystical way, and then eventually the occult way, and therefore eventually the building of the Antahkarana across the abstract mental plane. And we know from that, I deduce that the will is part of the process of building the Antahkarana, but also a step-by-step approaching of it. And I mean, I don't know when or how long it takes to understand it. We can define it, but in essence, our challenge is to approach it in gradations, for whatever that means. Okay, and that's basically the spiritual path and the orientation. And just like at some point, the aspirant and the disciple seeks to penetrate the levels of the soul by a step-by-step process, and then to become oriented toward. It's the same. I think it's the same way with the will.
Yeah, I think that's an important point to make. We're all at different stages. Every one of us is working in our own way, trying to achieve that next step. And that's why there's few, if any, hard and fast rules. I know we were discussing yesterday with the secretary-student relationship. You know, it's hard. It's hard to help people when that person is the only one who knows what's right for them. You know, so that's just one of those things that we're each struggling with, and we're probably always going to struggle with. That's life.
Yeah, it's at that step-by-step process of, you were saying earlier, Wayne, that, you know, will is also desire. You know, there's all those sort of graded steps where we uncover the will: aspiration, directional will, fixed determination, you know, but they're all important. And it's only when we achieve release through taking those steps that we'll really understand the will as a divine will, as a life force. Right, let's move on to the next part of this question. The way by which the will can be developed is the cultivation of the recognition of the divine plan down the ages.
I'll take a shot at this, but this is not my area of expertise. You know, I have a bachelor's in history. I have a master's in social work. So I have a bachelor's in history. So, you know, studying history, you recognize patterns, you know, and I think one of the things that Tibetan mentions, and I think we can all recognize, is that human beings seem to make the same mistakes over and over again, over and over and over again. And but we're getting better. I think things are moving forward slowly, but I think as the will is channeled through humanity as a group in greater degrees over the years, the mistakes we make become less severe. And so, I mean, that's my 2 cents, I don't know.
Do you think the history of ideas would be helpful for people to understand? I mean, yeah, sure. I think there is some writings on that already by various academics on a history.
Perhaps.
You haven't?
I'm sure. No, I don't. No.
You don't know of it?
No, I don't.
Okay, yeah.
But I mean, ideas is what it's all about. Yeah. You know what I mean?
Because I mean, if you have to look at history, it's so distorted, isn't it, by the nationalism of every country, yes. You know? So that's tricky.
But we have groups like the UN and all those groups that are bringing everybody together and trying to make things better. Yeah,
and the forerunners of the race down the ages, you know, they're a good example of that.
Yeah, that's picking up on that last thought, Chris. I've pondered that question over the years of being a student. And I looked at, I share with Joe again, it's like, Jesus, I can't make anything out of this. But as I pondered that just this morning, I said, you know, what if the thread that's there is the evolution of consciousness? That's the real thread of history, okay? Significant to I think, workers in the spiritual realm. And because we have the Sri Krishna, you had the Buddha, you had Moses before them, you had Christ, you have whatever, okay, and continue with the anticipation and all the saints of the Piscean age. But it dawned on me, what I thought about was that the value of what may have been the Tibetan's thought behind looking back was that if you saw this thread, okay, then we would have, we could have, I'm trying to follow my hen scratch here, recognition, the value of recognition of the theme should lead to conformity or a will to conformity. But prior to being able to conform to it, and here again comes desire, the desire to at least be similar to the conformity. Does that make sense? My notes are all over the place. I wrote it so fast. But here's what I said. What is the recognition? But that there is growth in consciousness with the Christ and the Buddha demonstrating the way, leading and demonstrating the end for us when we look at their particular lives. So that's the historical context that I look at when I try to apply that recognition concept.
Thank you.
I think the problem that exists is that the recognition of the divine plan, if you recognize the divine plan unfolding, then you are going to be motivated to bring your own will into alignment with that because you want to be part of what's happening. You want to be part of the reality of this plan. And there are a certain minority, perhaps, of humanity who recognize this plan to the degree that they can align their will with it. But is humanity recognizing that there is a divine plan? That's open to debate. As with all these things, you can interpret it in different ways, but it brings to mind, because everybody these days is getting very excited about 2025, the Tibetan actually says that by that time, 3 recognitions must be evidenced by humanity and affecting human thinking and action. And one of those is a steadily increased recognition of the plan on the part of the masses. And whether that's happening, I'll be interested to know what others think.
I was just going to say a comment on, predictions in general. In my personal opinion, I think that placing too much emphasis on predictions can be a bad thing. Best case scenario, if there's a prediction that there's going to be an individual or a teaching coming at a certain time, best case scenario, we build an astral shell around that idea. And even if it were to come, we would misinterpret it completely because of this emotion that we've been throwing at it. Worst case scenario, it doesn't happen. And then we have people leaving out of, disappointment or whatever. So that's just my 2 cents. I mean, everybody has a different view on that, and that's fine. Just something to keep in mind, I think.
I think that's a very important point, if you don't mind me just saying, that Joseph makes, because I think there is, it can be problematic and it can develop an astral shell. And there is this thing about 2025 that I think we have to be very careful about. And the predictions that the Tibetan made, although he wouldn't hold him down to that, because he always says, for instance, with a new teaching, it will depend on whether for instance, the teaching will only continue if the shrine of human living has been rebuilt and the sharing of the world's resources. So based on that, I don't think we should hold our breath. But on the other hand, it's interesting to take not so much predictions, but generalities of what the Tibetan forecasts for some time in the future. And I think it's very good that we use the as if technique in the school. We put a little bit of a positive spin on things because we have to do that. But at the same time, we must never lose sight of how important the discrimination is and to have a clear-eyed view of what's going on in the world. And I think it's questionable that at the moment humanity is developing any sense of a divine plan. There's some wonderful developments taking place, through the sort of scientific discoveries and science sort of like moving in a sort of like resonance with Eastern teachings and Buddhism, and people are very much into that. But the problem is, another thing that he said humanity has to do is to awaken to a sense of the inner spiritual government, that there is a plan, there is an inner group guiding that. And I think we're in a very difficult situation because of the fact that religions haven't come together more, and they don't provide the context or a sort of zeitgeist in which we can do that. And we brought this up in one of the school letters, that wonderful things are happening with all these quantum fields and that, and we can understand how we're all interrelated. But the idea of a structured sort of hierarchies of intelligence is quite difficult to bring into that scenario, and to unify, science and philosophical thinking, religious thinking, and to build on top of that in a way that appeals to the public is quite a challenge.
Thanks, Lawrence. I suppose also it depends on your definition of the plan. And he does talk very generally about the plan, like the evolution of consciousness. And I think that is perceivable and successful. But then he talks about a definition that the hierarchy work with is the production of a subjective synthesis in humanity and a telepathic interplay, which will eventually annihilate time. And it'll make available to every man all past achievements and knowledge, reveal to man the true significance of his mind and brain, and make him the master of that equipment. And it'll make him omnipresent, and eventually the door will open to omniscience. So, that's between those sort of perspectives, maybe we should cut humanity a bit of slack in that sense, So, I think there is progress, I really do.
If I could take slight issue with that, I'm sure you
yes, you
won't.
can.
I think what you say is very true, but at the same time, if we're talking about a plan, the evolution of consciousness is a goal, a wonderful goal, but it's not a plan as I see it. A plan is a structure. If you look at any plan, by definition, it's a structure of how we get to that goal. It's a plan of action. And the second thing that the Tibetan talked about is what the plan is. That again really is a goal. It's what will be the outcome of the plan when the plan is implemented. So if the plan is a structure for how we proceed, do we see that happening at the moment? Certainly we do see wonderful things through the new group of world servers. I would say that they are implementing the plan, if not consciously as such. And we are building through the various ways of thinking that they have towards something that is very arcane and mysterious. And there is a feeling about that in the work of the new group of world servers, because they have that kind of mystery to them. But, I think we also shouldn't be afraid to look at where humanity actually stands at this time. And, my question remains.
Well, I'm going to throw a little occult or too esoteric. What's the word I'm looking for? Vibrations into this. But at one point, he also says that the plan is substance. And that really gets a little tough. That really gets esoteric. Okay. I would like to briefly say something about the astral, what you call astral shell that may be developing about the reappearance. I read in Mary Bailey's book. I was reviewing that recently, and she, in the opening of the book, she gives communications between DK and Alice in 1919. And what she says here, I don't have my glasses on, but he says, "Forget not that when he comes for whom you look, he will not at first contact the world as a whole. Picture not to yourselves a sudden taking of a physical body or various physical bodies in various places, and a sudden plunging into the work that will attract the attention of the public, of the papers, and the press. When he comes, is it not more probable that, with his masters and initiates, he will silently come, the appearing known only to the few of you in all countries who work with faithful service and unremitting zeal? I emphasize the word unremitting, for it holds the secret of recognition." That struck me when I heard y'all, when you brought up the idea of the astral problem.
So any further thoughts? Obviously the plan is...
We're leaving it.
Yeah, it is a difficult one. I mean, you did acknowledge the new group of world servers. Oh, sorry. You did acknowledge the new group of world servers. And that was what I was about to say, that all the fields of finance and psychology, the arts, they are really changing and they are becoming almost mystical, as you said, and they're touching a lot of people. So there is a lot of change taking place in consciousness, I think. But as you say, it's not a structured approach in that sense, but maybe within those fields there is some structure, I don't know.
Well, there's a tremendous drive, isn't there, when you look at the new group of servers as a whole. Anybody speaking who's a member of the new group of world servers, I don't like using that term all the time, but you always see a drive behind them. It's almost tangible, like nothing's going to get in their way, and they just speak in their own way, something that's very compelling, and something that has its eye on the goal and is determined to reach it, whatever the obstacles are. You'll just see them unrelentingly, really, just keep on going forward, and that is the will in action.
Well, I think we will bring the session to a close. I just wanted to thank my three wise men, Lawrence and Wayne and Joseph. And we try. Just want to give a couple of announcements. We're going to break for 15 minutes now, and during that time we'll be playing some compositions by Curtis Hoffman, Curtis over there, which were inspired by the High Interlude of the Year. And Michael said he was going to put some information on the chat box for those online. Okay, Michael, yeah, doing that. Is there anything on the table for? No. No. Okay, well, you can approach Curtis if you would like to. And also during the break, it's such a good opportunity to form triangles at the conference. And if you're interested in forming another one or your first one, please go to the outside onto the balcony.
Chris, I think we'll just stay inside. It's easy.
Go in here?
Yeah.
Okay, and meet with Kathy. She'll be over there by that table. Thank you very much. And we will see you in 1/4 of an hour's time, which is about 1:45. Okay. Thank you.
Hello, everybody. If please, we're going to be starting soon, so make your way to your seats and we'll get started. Thank you.
Maybe it would be good to just sound an Om to settle down the energy in the room. So hello, everyone. Can you hear me? Thank you so much for being here at this powerful opportunity of the Wesak full moon and these days of distribution of these inpouring energies. As those of you who are on the upper degrees of the school will know that the title of this talk, the Way of Fire, comes from an ancient mantra that's used in some of the meditations in the upper degrees, and many of you will be familiar with it. It's a mantra that is a call to the soul. It's a means of awakening students' fiery aspiration and aids, we're told, in the process of purification. We say, I seek the way. I yearn to know. It's a call for the personality to move beyond the visions and fleeting deep impressions that flit in and out of our waking consciousness. And it's asking us to enter into our true home that lies on the other side of the veil. But it's also asking us to keep our feet firmly anchored in this world, in that dual life of the discipleship work that we do. And at this fiery and stimulating time in planetary history, it's not recommended that we use this mantra unless we wish to bring the fire into our lives. When students first enter the school training, they're asked if they've counted the cost of treading the path. And most people said, of course, I've counted that cost. But before taking up the journey, it's hard to know what the cost really will be. But then when we're beginning to use the mantra of fire, it's often at a later stage in that process of treading the path. It's at a stage when the air is a little thinner, when the way is a little steeper. But we are carried along by our group brothers, and that is the big advantage of those later degrees in the teaching. So we also know that in addition to the fiery nature of the path itself, we're entering into a period in planetary history. We're living in a period in planetary history, which is very fiery in its nature. And we read about this in the New Testament, particularly in the Gospel of Matthew and in Revelation. We speak of this time as a time of tribulation. Also in the Bailey teachings, we characterize this period as an initiatory cycle. It's spoken of as a time of rending, when old things pass away and the voices of men are lost in the crash and thunder of the fall. The Agni Yoga teachings speak of this time as one in which we're living in a fiery world, with the unfolding of events that relate to the planet's fate. And these teachings advise people to prepare for what they call a fiery baptism and the inevitable epoch of fire. Fire is central to all life, and it is, in fact, life itself. It's the governing principle, the conditioning energy of our entire solar system. And although we do live in, we're told, a second ray system, a love system, the essential quality of our solar logos, our sun, is that of an all-consuming fire. So the planetary lives, the planets, in their turn, stand as recipients of that fire from the sun. But it's said that our planet, because we are on a particularly accelerated rate of initiatory vibration, that we're receiving a special dose, an increased dose of light from the sun to forward our process, because our logos is somewhat behind in his schedule. He has a timetable. And so there's a forcing process, which we generally think is applied to ourselves as disciples, but in reality, it's more related to the logos and his time cycles. So we mirror in our work the logos. We cry out, "Not in me seeks the way of peace. Not in me yearns for earth. Let the fire rage, the flames devour. Let all the dross be burnt." And this cry is issued forth from the various burning grounds through which the disciple passes at the various stages of that journey, until at some point he reaches that narrow gate wherein another type of fire awaits him. This is the fire that burns away the barriers that exist between individuals, groups, and nations, and which permits the free-flowing influx of life itself. It's interesting to consider the nature of our fiery world when we consider our entry into the Aquarian age. For it's said that the etheric body of a planet in which we live and move and have our being, we live and move in this etheric body, it's always conditioned by the opposite polarity to the sun. So as our sun is now entering into the sign of Aquarius, the etheric body of our planet is conditioned by the energy of Leo. So we're all living in this fiery world, literally. It's the etheric nature of our planet. And this Leo energy is responsible for the growing integration and the growing mental polarization of humanity. But it's likewise true that under this Aquarian age, as we progress, the lion and the water bearer must merge and blend. And then the magic, we're told, of the waters work. And the lion ceases his roaring, and starts upon the mission of world service. So during this time of fiery planetary life, many people entering the school training have taken many spiritual paths and techniques prior to entering the school. Some of this is good, and others have caused undue stimulation in the subtle vehicles of the students. And therefore, there are sometimes problems that need to be settled down before the training can be truly effective for them. Many people are also reaching that point in their evolutionary journey where this way of fire begins to call them with fierce appeal, as the mantra states. And it's through the fires generated on the mental plane that one is enabled to free oneself from the fogs and mists of the lower astral and mental planes. It's a long journey occurring over the course of many lifetimes. And sometimes this journey is called by the rather interesting phrase, the reversal of the wheel. On this process of reversal, which is very long, the normal flow, the established currents and customs of the personality life are disrupted, and they gradually begin to lose their appeal. We all know this. There's a constant back and forth motion between periods of illumination, followed by periods of dissatisfaction. And this is the quality that's conditioning large masses of humanity at this time. And the Tibetan says, this is great. This is a wonderful thing. He wrote, deglamored and disillusioned, humanity awaits the coming revelation. It's a revelation that we're told will be the result of the combined effort of the Buddha and the Christ. And I think that revelation and that combined effort relates to the fact that the Tibetan tells us that the Buddha, when he reached enlightenment and left our world as we know it, he left behind for that distant time when his brother, the Christ, would need his vestures. It's called his vestures, his Buddhic astral sheath, his mental sheath. And that when the Christ reappears, he will put on these vestures and therefore be able to reach more fully the Eastern world to which the Buddha was so representative. So he'll have an incredible ability to reach both East and West. And in this long process of discipleship training, this reversal of the wheel, we're told that the planet Saturn has a key role to play. It's the planet of choice. It's the planet that governs our lives when we're making those first key and determining moments in the use of our mind in order to make the right decisions, which would be guided by our soul. These are the opportunities that are initially under the influx of Saturn when one begins this long process of the reversal. Wherein the knocking of the lords of karma come our way, Saturn being one of the lords of karma. And this creates the hard knocks that many individuals undergo as they come under the more non-sacred aspect of the planet Saturn. But then, as we enter more fully onto the spiritual path, Saturn becomes our friend. Saturn becomes the bestower of opportunity. Then we declare, I will determine, under Saturn, I will determine for myself the way to go. Then onward I will move. I will not travel up and down the land, nor turn in space, but onward I will move. And therefore, I just wanted to share a thought about the importance of this time under the influence of Saturn, because it is such a powerful planetary influence governing the life of disciples. As we may know, in March of this year, Saturn entered into the final sign of the zodiac, the sign of Pisces. This is a time when there is a powerful ending, because Pisces being the final sign, it's an ending of a long 29-year cycle. And the discipleship group receives the full benefit of that richness, that experience that Pisces gives, the richness of that sign. It takes from all the signs. And so this is a visionary period for the group of world servers. It's a time of looking backwards and wondering, what are we envisioning as we move forward with our next step? And instrumentally potent at this time is also the fact that the planet Neptune, the most visionary of all the signs, as we move towards 2025, these two planets are going to align. And so this exponentially magnifies the vision of this period, the ability to ground the vision and give it form with the coming together of Neptune and Saturn in the sign of Pisces. But then the really interesting thing to me, very synchronous, is the fact that as we approach 2025, these two planets move practically synchronistically into the sign of Aries. New birth, revelation, new beginnings, first ray energy to coincide with that first ray cycle, which the conclave in 2025 always brings. So if we do feel sometimes like, is humanity going to make the grade? Will we reach the opportunity of the conclave? I think that this planetary influence is really going to be aiding us. But it's always helpful with planetary influences. They present the possibility, and it's up to humanity to appropriate that. And hierarchy never knows the free decision that humanity will choose, which way we will choose. Will we appropriate the energy or not? And therefore, we have, as a new group of world servers who understand somewhat the influences underlying outer events, we have to remain detached. We don't know what choice humanity will take. We don't know what choice we will take. And so there are many, surely many challenging burning grounds ahead of humanity. It's not going to be that 2025 comes, as Lawrence was saying, and that all our problems will be solved. Of course not. And this point was illustrated recently by an impassioned commentator who spoke of the challenges of our time and quoted a 2,500-year-old writing from the great Lao Tzu, who was writing of his time. He said, when rich speculators prosper while farmers lose their land, when government officials spend money on weapons instead of cures, when the upper classes are extravagant and irresponsible, and the poor have nowhere to turn, all this is robbery and chaos. And he went on to say, those who try to control and use force to protect their power, they take from those who don't have enough and give to those who have far too much. So through these words spoken 2,500 years ago, we can see the cyclic nature of all life, patterns repeating themselves. But the difference today is that we have the new group of world servers. We have hundreds and hundreds, thousands of individuals who are beginning this long process of reversing the wheel and who are striving to stand in the middle ground between the violent poles that are attempting to pull us out of our alignment. For although the challenges abound, we know that we have many advantages that did not exist in Lao Tzu's time. And we stand as a group, a band of brothers. We've developed the tools with which to navigate the rather treacherous currents of the stormy seas. And this group moves forward together on the way out of the fire, into the cold, and towards a newer tension. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Kathy. Can everyone hear me? I think so. A voice from beyond. And here comes Minsa from Geneva headquarters. And so we now have Geneva, London, and New York together in a little triangle. So the session that we've got now is Discipleship in a Time of Fire. Before we move into this, we should make a few comments on what Kathy's shared with us, and you might want to join in here, Minsa. One question I had was simply about you spoke about the influx of will energy, Kathy, in around 2025. And I just wondered, where's this coming from?
The fact that it's my understanding that every 25th year in each century, starting a few hundred years back, there has been that influx of the will energy at the 25th year. It's highlighted in the teachings in various points.
Okay,
Yeah.
so we presume that it's coming through Pluto, Vulcan, Aries, usual suspects.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's many ways in which the will can enter in, but primarily with each subsequent century, there are so many more people able to handle that influx that it's much more potent this time. I mean, we've gone, as you know, we've gone through since the 1925 conclave, the end of the war with the Shambhala energy, not a direct impact, I guess, but then 75 and the year 2000 with direct Shambhala impacts. Humanity is much more under this conditioning influence. So I would assume that the impact that comes in 2025 will be substantial. Yeah.
Your thoughts, Minsa? Do you have anything to share on
Well, let me first, before we go into the details of 2025, I just want to share with you that it's a great pleasure to be here again after all those years that we couldn't come to New York. This is the first of 3 conferences which Chris mentioned in the opening, and it is a great pleasure to be here again. And I want to convey all the greetings and good thought of the full Geneva headquarters group to all of you to make this conference a success. About 2025, like Lawrence, I'm a bit more sober and maybe a bit more less expective. I know it is going to happen, that's for sure. I know that the hierarchy is coming together. I never would say, are we as humanity on the mark or not? That's not for us to say. And I don't think that it is a good thing now to start, because if you look on your agenda, you say, oh, we are 2 years away from 2025. Maybe I should start meditating faster or more or slower just to be there. I don't think it's going to happen like that. There are things going on in the world, and I appreciate very much the remark which Katie made about Lao Tzu. I think it is a repetition which is going on. And the basis of that is, I think it is materialism, which, and then I come back to a remark which was made yesterday, where in the externalization of hierarchy, the Tibetan analyzes the situation between the forces of light, the forces of materialism, which were ramping there. One thing one thing he mentioned at that point too is, because the the subject of our discussion is the fiery ordeal in that context of the expression of the will. I don't remember the exact words, but I was struck by that word of fiery ordeal. It struck me because when I was young in the Netherlands, I would go, that was years ago, and at that time, you would still go on Sunday to a school with the Bible, where people instruct you about your religion, either Protestant or Catholic. So I looked up a little bit, what does it mean, this fiery ordeal? And then I came to that passage in the externalization of hierarchy. And one other alternative for a cataclysm or that ordeal, which the Tibetan mentioned, is inspired leadership. And I think inspired leadership is something which we could keep in mind. And of course, when we look nowadays around in the world of politics, it's maybe difficult to see inspired leadership. But inspired leadership is not only limited to that level. Actually, inspired leadership is available on all levels, be it on a national level, in a community level, even in your own environment. And maybe we need a little bit of the mantra of fire where Katie was talking about, to realize that even we can be inspiring our community, the people which are around us, not by saying, oh, we know it all better, not at all, but just by being who we are from our own soul perspective. I would just start with that, maybe.
I think Min said that that brings us nicely into our first question about, you're talking about being who we are in our community, where that is our first field of service. This passage that we've got here I don't know where, I don't think it's a passage, I think it's something that New York had put together for us to talk about. On the path of discipleship, we're urged to relinquish all personal gain for the greater good of the group. And that's an interesting way of looking at it, but how do we reconcile that with we're also told that the priorities of our devotion should be to the plan first, those whom the plan serves second, and those who serve the plan third.
Well, we were talking earlier in the earlier discussion period about the evolution of the plan being an indication of the will, or a way that we can understand the will. And so when we think of this sequence of unfolding that you just mentioned, I think that the plan is our first loyalty. So I think, yeah, maybe you're pointing out some flaw in our question, you know. But as the earlier discussion was pointing or highlighting, the plan is abstract. But I think for those of us who are on a spiritual path, I think we can understand it in terms of our spiritual practices, you know, this creation or this realization of the subjective synthesis. I mean, that's really what our meditation work is attempting to place us into. And so, yeah, I think we can dedicate ourselves to that realization, to that working out, an energetic flow that unites all things and all
We
beings.
do want to relinquish ourselves to the greater good of the group, I suppose, in order that the group can then serve the plan better.
difficult to add something to that. Well, just one thing which comes to mind, the question of the plan, it's a question which comes back in almost all our meditation reports. We are asked, what do we understand of the plan? Do we get closer to it? And I think the only way to get closer to it is individually, indeed by meditation. As a group, through more affiliating or being more aligned with the group. Yeah, that's about all I would say about that.
Of course, a group travels, I suppose, in parallel, doesn't it, really? It's that state of isolated unity. So in one sense, you are sort of subjecting yourself to a group organism. And in that sense, you take on the will of the group. And the more you sacrifice yourself, not so much to perhaps to the, when you think of the group, you don't think of the individualities who are comprising it so much, but you think of the overall field, the auric emanation of the group with which you feel aligned. And that feels so in sync with your own resonance that you are prepared to give more and more to that, to amplify the group note as best you can, and you draw upon the group note to amplify your own field of service.
In terms of sacrifice, which is our, the theme this weekend, there's so much that we can give up still. And I know we speak of that as our role as disciples, to have sacrificed all for the good of the group, for the good of humanity. But I can only speak for myself. That's a very high bar, to think that we have no, personal agenda in anything that we do. And so I think this keynote is really helping us to take it to a deeper level as we move into an age which will be characterized by Aquarius, by an influence that is completely related to group service. So I think it's a high bar. It's a high bar.
And I suppose sacrifice, as we've touched upon in school letters as well, the way that to look at it is not so much a giving up, but a taking over. Because as soon as you recognize that there is a plan and that you feel identified with it, you want to be taken over by the vision of that plan. And then there's a very easy relinquishment of what's holding you back. Your drive becomes so powerful that it's focused so much on the new goal that through attrition, things that were once hindrances and obstacles on the path just fall away, simply because of that dynamic, expulsive power of a new affection, as I think it's called. And that's a positive way of looking, I think, at sacrifice, of being part of the campaign to make whole.
So there's one thing I want to mention because it came to mind, but it's a very practical thing. It was a talk a couple of years ago in London by Lee Blackburn. He experimented by a giving economy, just giving without receiving. I'm a bit summarizing what his whole talk about. I think there was also a paper in the Beacon a couple of recently, so you can read it again. But I think that was a very practical way of sacrificing things. And I think we can just, I will not recommend to do that now, all of us in that way, but we can each in our own way experiment to try to relinquish certain things in our own life And this was just an excellent example. We did work, by the way. He was very happy all the time. I think he did it for a year or so. So it does work.
I think, when you're going on any course of true discipleship training, these things, in a sense, take care of themselves, don't they? So what you're saying is obviously very true. We want to look for practical things that we can do to take that next step. And at the same time, by subjecting ourselves to a training process with any kind of good school, or if you're a member of the New Group of World Servers, a field that you want to give all to humanity through that particular way of service, it just becomes, your goal. And then the forces in a discipleship school, for instance, that you evoke naturally in daily meditation, they are going to bring a lot to the surface that you will then realize you have to sacrifice. Because what's sacrifice for one person may well be fanaticism for another. We have to travel across the razor-edged path, true, but we also know that moderation is the way forward as well. So whereas an act of sacrifice might be the right thing to do in a certain field for one level of consciousness, you can also try and sacrifice something too soon when you should perhaps, I think St. Paul mentioned it, didn't he? So be careful about sacrificing too much, why should you die? I think I'm just paraphrasing that, but you can evoke too much fire by becoming fanatical on that path of sacrifice. And we see that distortion in the world today, don't we? That sacrificial, in one sense, distorted into fundamentalism. As we carry on talking, by the way, we should, if anybody wants to join in at this point, please raise your hand, and Michael will give you the opportunity to share your thoughts or comments with us.
Just also, Lawrence, anybody who's online can also raise their bar and clicking reactions and then raise hand there.
I have a question that always comes to my mind. So it can be said in two ways, I guess. The first way would be, if the group is strengthened by stronger individuals, how, and the Tibetan always says, don't mistake sacrificing your material body, your physical body, that's elevating you. It's not, so what is that balance between, if I'm strengthening the individual or myself, because I am an individual in the group, and through that being the group, when is that selfish or not? And to the point of the group of word servers, I always have this question of am I working to make money and therefore is being selfish? Should I, do something that is more purposeful? And at the same time, there's Alice Bailey and the Tibetan saying you are where you need to be, so when to act, when is actually an act of service or selfish, is very hard for me to understand,
I think you just need to give up coffee.
Yeah.
Any thoughts on that, Kathy or Minsa?
Just one
Not the
remark
coffee,
on that point of personality. I think it's somewhere a thought which is recurring, but it's not so much about a strong or a weak personality. It's about an integrated personality. Once you integrate the personality with the soul, you do need, if we want to change this world, we do need strong personalities, otherwise nothing is going to change. But integrated personalities, but very strong. So that's my 2 cents.
The only thing I would say is that along the path, at every point, we have to listen to the voice of our conscience, because that is our soul. So that's the best way, if you keep having a recurring questioning about a situation. The Tibetan doesn't advocate abrupt action, measured action. But if it keeps coming up, you do have to ask yourself and look at the situation.
Any other raised hands there, Michael? I should say as well that
I
flippant
have the-
comment I made was related to a school session yesterday. So if you're new today, we haven't gone mad. Yes, anyone else?
Emmanuel.
Yes, let me see if I can put something together. And the keynote. The keynote was or is let the group affirm the will as an expression of the law of sacrifice. This keynote is the point of revelation given to those who are taking the second initiation. As the result of the second initiation, they have this revelation of the will as an expression of the law of sacrifice. But that will at that stage is demonstrating one aspect of the will, the aspect of destruction. So the individuals or the group that is taking the second initiation, the third initiation, and the fourth initiation are dealing with the will as it manifests in destruction. But let's leave the third and the fourth initiation too advanced for us. Let's come to the second initiation, which is approachable and which the majority of the new group of world servers are facing, and which the Christ supervises, and for which the Christ is coming to be the person in charge, the planetary initiator, to supervise that, in contrast to the Lord of the world as the one initiator. So what is destroyed at the second initiation? And who is taking the second initiation? Because the major problem is wrong identification. We see feelings come and go, but we are not our feelings. We see thoughts of different types, but we are not our thoughts. So who are we? So when we realize that we are the fragment of the soul that was put down at individuation, then we are not the physical body. We are not the astral body, and we are not the mental body. Those must be sacrificed. They must be made sacred, which means that the etheric physical body, the astral body, and the mental body, in the process of being made sacred, is transformed into their higher correspondence. So in the case of the second initiation, the will destroys the selfish astral body and replaces it with the intuition, even aspiration goals. That is why the Tibetan said, the keynote for the second initiation is unlimited devotion. Devotion is the pull and the call of the heart. So when it's unlimited, then it will be able to demonstrate the hierarchical love for all, to all, in all, at all times. So this is the will that is contacted at the second initiation. So the lower is destroyed in order for that lower to be replaced by the higher. In the case of the second initiation again, the selfish, astral, me-focusing energy is destroyed by the will, the energy of the will. And in its place, the first impression of the intuition is replaced. And the person or the group takes one of the major steps towards integration. So in summary, we have to understand who takes the initiation, who sacrifices, who is working with the will. It is that fragment of the soul, Arjuna, on the battlefield of Kurukshetra, who is going through this. It is not your physical body who is going through this. It is not your emotional body who is going through this. It is not your mental body, but that point of light, which is the soul, that is doing the sacrifice, that is making sacred, that is working with the soul to destroy those vehicles and replace them with something universal, permanent, and representing God. Thank you.
How are we doing for time, Michael? We're already 5 minutes over. Can we keep going?
There's some people, we can go a bit longer. There's some people online though that have their hands raised. If you'd like to go to them next, Lawrence.
Yes, okay. Sure. Just let us know when we need to stop. Okay, and we'll carry on until we get the word from you. But yes, that was very all-encompassing, what we heard there. Unless there's something you'd like to say on that, Kathy or Minster, should we take another comment? Please just keep someone
they just nodded their heads, but you couldn't hear them, I don't think, Lawrence.
I'll say that again.
You asked if they had anything to say, and they said no, basically.
Okay.
But you couldn't hear them because, anyway, yeah.
Yeah, people got their hands raised, have they, Michael?
Well, we have some people online, yes.
Yeah. Okay.
So. I think we've already unmuted. I forgot the name. Jacqueline, go ahead.
Yes, I would like them to speak to the balancing of being a supportive and active group member, and with also a willingness, which of course is another part of the will aspect, a willingness to be an inspired and servant leader. Balancing that in group work, not in theory, but when we're really working in a group and it isn't always in agreement or it isn't always in alignment, but contrast those two aspects of leadership, being supportive and part of the group while at the same time being willing to assert leadership. Thank you.
Delighted to throw that one over to Kathy and Minster.
Well, I can make one remark, but it's a personal experience, and that depends all on what you mean by group work. The first 30 years of my life I lived in the Netherlands, but the second 30 years I lived in France in a community, because I thought that was a group. Thereafter, not totally thereafter, but almost similar, at the same time I joined the Arcane School, and there I learned that there is a totally different concept of group. And that's something where you can work together, and actually we do. In each degree of the school, we work with a group, whether we realize it or not. Of course, we try to remind each time all of the students, look, you are working in a group, but you are. And you draw on the thoughts, on the ideas, thoughts and thought forms. There's a whole theory about that I won't go into. But we contribute to the group thought, and we can draw on the group thought. And I think that's an important thing to keep in mind.
Yeah, in that regard, I like the passage where the Tibetan describes an ashram as a reservoir composed of all the dreams and wishes of the master at the center of the ashram. But it's also true what Minsa just said, that in our work in the Arcane School, students, all of the work that students contribute in terms of their meditations, their monthly reporting, their financial contributions, all of these things serve as their contributions to that reservoir, you know, and sometimes we can just visualize it that way, as pouring our little cups, you know, our chalices into this great ashramic field. And from that, as Minta also said, then all students in the group who are in need for their service work, for their particular crisis that they're going through, they can all draw upon this reservoir, this living water. And I think that will be increasingly the case as we move into Aquarius.
It all comes down really to the strength of the vision, doesn't it? That holds a group together. You know, that's quite easy to see with the Alice Bailey writings, that they have such an amazing vision that it's very hard to insert yourself in between that vision and the group, because nobody can say anything much more than the Tibetan has. We can only work it out and step it down, but always the vibration of that teaching, it's so alive that by keeping yourself balanced and supportive of the group and always drawing upon that vision, it's a very strong, cohesive force. And you realize that just by pondering on that vision and the way the Tibetan writes, that you are thinking the books into the general public's mind in some way. That's what he actually said, and that's what our group service is to a large extent, thinking the teachings through into the public consciousness. But always you get with spiritual groups a vision that will hold a group together for so long. But the further you usually get away from the originator of that teaching, the harder it is to hold that group vision together, and you get groups starting to fragment and to branch off and form their own groups according to their understanding of the vision. And that can be quite a healthy process as well. You know, it's, I mean, look how it's happened in Christianity. And that is the destiny, ultimately, I think, of all of these things. But we are in I think, a slightly unique position, at least we have been up until now with the Alice Bailey writings, the Tibetan's work, is because the vibration of the books, it just doesn't seem to age. It's still, when you read it, it's alive, and it engages the the abstract mind and the intuition. So rather than learning concrete information, it's more of a process of spiritual osmosis. And that continues to work because through the text, you go straight into the livingness of the ideas that are presented. And that all filters then into the group. And so the group, just being part of it as a spiritual organism, is it really? It's just giving your life to the group organism and to the organism, which is the plan, and to humanity, and we're all organisms within greater organisms.
I think we have time
Anyone
for
else, Michael?
Yeah, there's one more hand here. I think we have time for one more.
Just a thought to add to that, and in relation to this last question, what role does sacrifice play in the life of a group, particularly during the time of immense planetary crisis? To me, this discussion, the whole of the discussion is very much centered on that. And we can also think that just as in, for example, the Arcane School group, whether people are conscious of it or not, the group itself is a living potency. And that part of the beauty of it is that there are generations of students who have been doing this work of living the teachings into human experience. And it's nothing outer, but esoterically, to me, we can see the group itself in its evolutionary life. And the important thing, I think, is then to see that this group that we know so intimately is a part of the heart center of the new group of world servers. And then we think that other groups that we may know nothing about, that are also part of the heart center, because they are esoteric and intuitively working, that together there's something where the fire of sacrifice has evolved, and we can see the plan at work. And so that, to me, it's really important to move our sense of group from the group we know that is our group and our alignment with the ashram, to the thought of the other ashramic groups that we may or may not know in human consciousness, and see that something is happening which to me is related to those words we use, the reappearance of the Christ.
Would you not say, Steve, that thinking in terms of specific serving groups within the new group of world servers is part of that, or are you just talking specifically about esoteric groups?
I think both, Lawrence.
Mm.
I was talking specifically about esoteric groups, but that brings up the relationship between the heart center of the new group of world servers and the new group of world servers itself. We cannot think of the new group without thinking of the heart center, because that's where the life and vitality and the radiation. And when we think about the heart center, and the best way for me to do this is to think about that part of the heart center that I know about, which is the group that I'm part of. And when we think of that, we see what fire is to me. And then if we know some other groups, I'm fortunate I'm aware of some other groups that to me, in my little judgment, are also in their own way a part of this heart center. Then to me, the plan is real, because you can see human consciousness in interaction with synthesis in a way that has never occurred before in human consciousness.
I think what you're saying is very true. And what I also find is a very interesting development is that, to my mind, when I look at the new group of world servers and the field of servers out there in the specific work, they seem to me clearly associated in some way with seed groups. I think when you start exploring the work of a particular serving person, a real creative, you start to find then where he draws his or her inspiration from, and you find a group of very advanced thinkers, but who also have the heart center right completely open. And I think that you would be wrong almost to say that they are on the outskirts of the new group of world servers, that they themselves, I think, are an integral part of the heart center just because of the developments that have taken place. And often they talk in very esoteric language, in one sense, clear, but very esoteric principles. And that seems to me like one of the most encouraging developments we see at the moment. Minsak, Cathay?
Sometimes when I think about the externalization today, it seems that there's such a degree of polarization, with so many access to different types of media, mainstream media, alternative media. People are falling down along lines that are quite divided. And so sometimes I think it's hard to distinguish what's truth and what isn't. But then we know that the fourth ray is coming in. And because of some links that people have been sharing with me, and probably all of the rest of you have seen as well, it seems that this fourth ray externalization is well underway. And there's no controversy about beauty, you know. There's no controversy about these young people that are coming in with a masterful understanding of the art of composition and the art of playing music. I saw a video of a 1.5-year-old playing something that they were creating with great deliberation. It was amazing. And then I saw a 10-year-old girl who had written a symphony, and someone said to her, "Wow, I know a lot of people have been comparing you to Mozart, and what do you say to that?" And her response was, "Well, that's all well and good, but Mozart was Mozart, and I am Alma," you know? So there's a lot coming through. You just have to, there's no controversy, you know, about art. So.
Anyone else?
Lawrence, I think we do have to sort of wrap it up now and get on with our meditation.
Okay. Okay, we are good, what are we, 15, 20 minutes over, so I'm sure whoever was going to speak then can hang on to that thought for tomorrow's session. So let's take the essence of all the work that's been done today and built upon that which we did yesterday, and take it into our group meditation, letting in the light. With the keynote, let the group affirm the will as an expression of the law of sacrifice. Letting in the light.
Lawrence, I'm so sorry I just muted you accidentally, so could you go ahead and unmute yourself and just start over? I'm sorry about that.
Letting in the light. Group fusion. We affirm the fact of group fusion and integration within the heart center of the new group of world servers, mediating between hierarchy and humanity. I am one with my group brothers, and all that I have is theirs. May the love which is in my soul pour forth to them. May the strength which is in me lift and aid them. May the thoughts which my soul creates reach and encourage them. We project a line of lighted energy towards the spiritual hierarchy of the planet, the ashram of Sanat Kumara, and towards the Christ of the heart of hierarchy. Light towards Shambhala, the center where the will of God is known. Line of light towards Shambhala, the center where the will of God is known. Hold the contemplative mind open to the extrapolatory energies streaming into Shambhala, radiated through hierarchy. Visualize the three planetary centers, Shambhala, hierarchy, and humanity, coming into alignment and interplay. electronically note that they don't affirm the will as an expression of the law of sacrifice. Facilitation. Visualize the energies of light, love, and the will to good pouring throughout the planet and becoming anchored on earth in physical plane centers through which the plan can manifest. Sequence of energy precipitation, Shambhala, hierarchy, the Christ, a new group of world servers, men and women of goodwill everywhere, physical centers of distribution. Focus the consciousness as a group within the periphery of the great ashram. And all love, I stand. From that center, I, the soul, will outward move. From that center, I, the one who serves, will work. May the love of the divine self be shed abroad in my heart, through my group, and throughout the world. Visualize the downpouring spiritual inflow released from Shambhala through the hierarchy, streaming into humanity through the prepared channel. Consider how these energies are establishing the pathway of light for the coming world teacher, the Christ. Great invocation is sounded. Visualize the outpouring of light and love and power in the spiritual hierarchy through the 5 planetary inlets, London, Darjeeling, New York, Geneva, Tokyo, irradiating the consciousness of the whole human race. Point of light within the mind of God. Let light stream forth into the minds of men. Let light descend on earth. From the point of love within the heart of God, let love stream forth into the hearts of men. May Christ return to earth. From the center where the will of God is known, let purpose guide the little wills of men, the purpose which the masters know and serve. From the center, which we call the race of men, let the plan of love and light work out, and may it seal the door where evil dwells. Let light and love and power restore the plan on earth. Thank you very much, everybody. Wonderful afternoon. Thank you very much to Kathy and Minsa for their contributions, and also to Wayne and Joseph. And that lady at the beginning was quite good too. It was Christine, that's it. So tomorrow we have the secretarial workshop, which is beginning at 11 o'clock EDT, and we look forward to that. And 2 o'clock is open to everybody again tomorrow, and we'll pick up the thread, and who knows where it will go next. Very creative, I'm sure. So until then, goodbye for now.